I have said before, and will continue to say, that games are very different from other forms of media because of their interactivity. As I talked about in my Undertale video games are defined by their interactivity. In that video, I talked about using the interactivity found within game mechanics to develop characters, but there are some other side effects of interactivity worth addressing. For instance, most games have some sort of representation of the player in order to give them a vessel to relate to and use to effect change on the world. Not all games give the player an avatar, or even acknowledge their existence. Dwarf Fortress and Prison Architect are good examples of these avatarless games, and Ian Bogost wrote a great article about what these games say through their focus on the relationship between complex systems. But today, I want to focus on how the player's avatar can affect the player's psychology, and how the player psychology affects their avatar. Without further ado, let's begin. Before talking about player avatars, we first need to understand how enclothed cognition works in the real world before addressing how it works in the virtual world. This, of course, raises the question, what is enclothed cognition? Enclothed cognition was first observed in a psychological experiment conducted by Heijo Adam and Adam Galinsky. The experiment tested two groups of people. Each group was asked to perform the Stroop test, a psychological test where the name of a color is printed in a color that doesn't match the name. For instance, red might be written in blue letters. Participants must say the name of the color of the letters, not the word written. The Stroop test is notoriously difficult for humans, and we are prone to errors, and we take longer to read the colors than we would if we had to perform the same task with unrelated words. Returning to the study, before the test, each group was given a white coat. When the first group was given their coat, they were told that it was a scientist's lab coat, and the second group was told that they were given a painter's coat. Here's the thing. Even though both groups were given the exact same white coat, the group that was told it was a lab coat did far better than the other group on the task which required a precise attention to detail. This effect is referred to as the enclothed cognition effect, and it is created not only by the clothes, but also the symbolic meaning those clothes have on the user. If an alien with no knowledge of human culture were to wear the lab coat, it probably wouldn't affect its behavior in any way, because the alien has no pre-built idea of what this coat represents. But when a human who understands the symbolic meaning of the coat wears the coat, they will be constantly reminded of what that coat represents. On a psychological level, wearing the lab coat makes you feel smarter and more observant, and that feeling manifests as actual changes in your behavior. It is important to note that the effect that this lab coat has is not brought about by priming, which is when a stimulus primes somebody to notice a related stimulus. For instance, a person who heard the word yellow might be slightly faster to notice the word banana. In a later experiment conducted by Heijo Adams and Alan Garinsky, they discovered that enclothed cognition is stronger than priming on its own. In the experiment, researchers had subjects take a test requiring close attention to detail. One group was told to wear the lab coat, and the other simply saw it on a desk nearby. If priming alone was responsible for enclosed cognition, both groups would be expected to have the same results. But this is not what happened. The group that actually wore the coat had a better performance on the test than the group that was simply told that it was a lab coat on the desk. So how does enclothed cognition translate into the virtual world? This question was explored by psychologist Nicholas Yee, who ran a series of experiments exploring this question. In one experiment, Yee gave players an online avatar in a room with a mirror, allowing them to examine their avatar. Players were randomly assigned an ugly, normal, or beautiful avatar, and then asked to talk a bit about themselves in another room. Participants who had a more beautiful avatar tended to disclose more personal information, and were more outgoing than those with ugly avatars. In a follow-up study, Yee studied the effect that an avatar's height had on player behavior. He found that players who were given taller avatars tended to be more assertive in negotiation exercises than their short and stubby counterparts, regardless of the player's actual height. Interestingly, this effect lasts in the real world. In a follow-up study to the height experiment, Yi had participants do the same bargaining exercise in the real world, and the players who used the taller avatar still had the confidence that their avatar had given them in the virtual world. Yi called this effect the Proteus effect, after the Greek god Proteus, who's famous for being capable of adopting many forms, much like how players adopt many forms online. Both Enclothed Cognition and the Proteus effect stem from psychologist Daryl Bem's theory of self-perception. According to this theory, people's personalities are informed and developed by the actions they take. At first, this might seem counterintuitive, since most people assume that our actions are informed by our personality, not the other way around. In one study, a group of participants were hooked up to a beeping machine that measured their heart rate, and then asked to flip through Playboy magazines. However, like most psychological studies, the researchers were lying. The beeping machine actually had nothing to do with the heart rate of the participants. Instead, the researchers had complete control over the frequency of the beeps that came from the machine. As the participants thumbed through the magazine, the researchers would randomly increase the frequency of the beeps coming from the machine, informing the participant that their heart rate had supposedly increased. When asked which models they found the most attractive, the participants were more attracted to the models that they had seen when their heart rate machine beeped quickly. The participants noticed that their heart rate had increased with certain models, and this perception later affected their personality and interests. Now that we have explored the psychological background behind Enclothed Cognition and the Proteus effect, let's look at how this affects game design. In games where players don't have much control over their avatar's appearance, it is important for developers to make sure that the player's avatar synergizes with the kind of gameplay they are trying to support. One game that accomplishes this really well is Magicka. For those of you who might not be familiar with this game, Magicka is a game about combining various elements to create different kinds of spells. The player is represented by the stereotypical, hooded, D&D style wizard. This guides the player into thinking more like a wizard would think. If none of the mechanics were changed, but instead the players looked more like a berserker, players would play the game less like a thoughtful and intelligent wizard and more like a reckless berserker. If the mechanics of the game conflict with the player's avatar, then players might be psychologically driven to play the game in a suboptimal manner. Designers can also use the Proteus effect to enhance their designs and increase variety. When developing The Dragon and Flagon, a tavern brawl board game, designer Jeff Engelstein ran playtests where he removed the special abilities of the classes. Even though there was no mechanical difference between any of the classes, the players still adopted different playstyles that aligned with their classes, even though there weren't any mechanics pushing them to do so. But the player's avatar subtly informs how the character should be played, which makes the character much easier to learn for new players. In other words, the character's form should match their function. Splatoon is an excellent example of this. The entire game is contextualized by the Inkling's character design. Though Splatoon is a third-person shooter, it has a lot of mechanics that aren't very common in third-person shooters. For example, players have the ability to swim through the ink to reload their gun, move quickly, or to hide from enemies. This mechanic is completely unique to Splatoon, but it is very important that the player understands how to use it effectively. Nintendo can help players get comfortable using this mechanic through the character design of the Inklings. The player's association with Squid will drive them to take advantage of the Squid-like mechanics of the game. In the early stages of development, before the developers had created the Inklings, players played as rabbits. However, Nintendo soon realized that rabbits didn't really mesh well with the ink-based mechanics of Splatoon. Nintendo chose to base their characters off of squids because their connection to ink allowed them to mesh with the mechanics the developers were trying to create. Again, form fits function. If developers can take advantage of the Enclothed Cognition effect, it can be used to help your players get a handle on your mechanics and draw players into your world. Whether you are playing a mountain climber, a wizard, a pilot, a snake, a mercenary, a test subject, a secret agent, or a spelunker, your avatar will have an effect on you both in and out of the game. Our avatars are the link between the real world and the virtual world, and good avatars inform the players of how the mechanics work and can help them through the various challenges. If you have enjoyed this discussion of the Enclothed Cognition effect and the Proteus effect, consider leaving a like and subscribing to catch my future videos discussing the psychology of game design. If you want more psychology videos, feel free to check out my video about operant conditioning, or an excellent video from a fellow YouTuber, Daryl Talks Games, which talks about the functional fixedness in Dandara. This has been Chariot Rider. Have a good day.